Everything we've done so far has all been about building the project plan, deciding on the tasks themselves, deciding on their duration, their dependencies on other tasks, their resources, and then controlling any of the calendars that we might need to control. Microsoft Project's usefulness doesn't just end at helping lay out a pretty plan, it's great at being able to allow you to track your project. So we can put in task progression, it's finished, it's halfway done, it's three quarters done. We can delay tasks, we can resolve problems as we're working through the project. Now, the first thing that you want to do when you take your project, and we're going to take the My Kitchen working file, is to decide on the start date. When we're building the plan, the start date is totally arbitrary. Once you're ready to then start delivering, so building the kitchen, at that point you would set the correct project start date. So we can change the project start date by going to Project, Project Information, and there's the Start Date box. Now, bear in mind that changing the start date will only work if you've allowed all of your tasks to be auto-scheduled, therefore driven by the project start date, driven by their dependencies on other tasks, and driven by the availability of the resources that are assigned to them. If, however, you've chosen to manually schedule all your tasks, when you change the project start date, your tasks will not move to reflect that new start date. They will stay where you fix them. That's why, so many lessons ago, I suggested that the default for your tasks should be auto-scheduled, because the ability to then move your project forward or backwards to the correct start date becomes so much easier. So if I now take my project start date, which is currently set to October the 3rd, I now know when I'm going to actually start doing my kitchen, and we can set the correct project start date. And it's actually going to be December the 15th. So I change the project start date. When I then click OK, all of my tasks then move. There's not one task stuck. If I'd added a constraint, that may have forced a task to stay backwards in October. If I'd used manual tasks, they would have stayed where they were. So by having all my tasks as auto-scheduled, and that little icon there gives that away, the little blue icon with the arrow pointing to the right, means that my project tasks can all move to the new project start date, and then their relative position compared to that start date controlled by their dependencies on other tasks and the availability of the resources that are assigned to them. So I've now moved forward to a new start date, a correct start date, shall we say, of December the 15th. Once you've moved your project start date to the correct date and all the tasks have moved henceforth, at that point, we would set what's referred to as the baseline. And what the baseline is a copy of each of the current task start, end date, and costs, so that we have a measurement point, so we can measure ourselves against the baseline. In order to set the baseline, we use the project ribbon, come across to set baseline, and there are two options: clearing the baseline, so we can actually clear any baseline we've already put, or set the baseline. Well, I want to set the baseline. Where do I want to store the data for the set baseline? Well, the default is baseline, but there are actually 10 other fields that you could store that data in, or we'll keep ours in the baseline. And I want to store the baseline for the entire project, which is usually the case. Effectively, we've taken a snapshot of where everything is at this moment in time. You can set it for selected tasks, so I would need to select some tasks in order to do that, but usually we would set it for the entire project. If you wanted to set it for a selected task, that is really when you would probably use one of the other 10 baseline options and reserve the baseline set of values for the whole project. So I set the baseline for the entire project. Now, nothing appears to have happened. There's no flashing lights or anything. But what has happened is the values of all my tasks have now been saved, copied into the baseline. Then as I start to progress through the project, I can compare where I am currently against the baseline, so where I was. That comparison is easily done through the tracking Gantt. So on the task ribbon, we can choose other Gantt charts, and the tracking Gantt is the one I'm after. In the tracking Gantt, if I bring a task into view, you can see we have two horizontal bars. One is the current situation for that task, so the current planned duration, location for that task, and the grey bar underneath is the baseline. Because I've not marked any progression yet, my baseline equals my current, so we can see everything is underneath each other. If, however, I go and remove the project and say we're not going to start on Thursday, that's a silly day to start, and we'll start on Monday the 19th. Okay, What you then see in the tracking Gantt is we are now adrift. So these red and blue bars are the current plan. The grey bar is the current baseline. So I've moved the start date forward by a number of days, puts me behind plan. Now, maybe that's not what I want to say. I want to move the start date, but then I also want to effectively move the baseline to meet that, so I'm still on target when I start. Well, we do that by going to the project ribbon, set baseline and clear baseline. Clear the baseline plan, last saved with today's date for the entire project, yes. Okay, and you see the grey bars disappear because there now is no baseline to measure against. And I reset the baseline. So there's nothing to stop you clearing the baseline and resetting the baseline as you move through the project, which isn't really a very good idea because it then doesn't show where you were. So once you've decided on the start date, and that's the fixed start date, at that point you would set your baseline. So you then have a measurement point to look back on. Once you've set the baseline, we can then compare ourselves to the baseline where our tasks ought to be and where our costs ought to be. And a quick look at that comparison can be done in project information statistics. And here you have current, so that's the current plan, the baseline, which is actually equal to the current at the moment, no actual progression at all, no variance because there's no progression yet. Current duration, work and cost are all the same for the current, the baseline and the remaining because nothing's been done yet. But as you move through the project, you can come back to this statistics box for a quick overview of where you currently are. How much have you spent? How much are you away from the original plan? So from the original baseline. Time-wise, are we ahead, behind from the original plan? So it's a nice little summary box, and that's accessed through project information, where you change the start date anyway, and then statistics. So that's now allowing us to start using our project file. The same project file that we used to plan the project is now being used to monitor the project.